Carnage goes to hell and kills a god, and it's amazing. Check this out. So what this does is this initially opens up with Hela, the ruler of hell. Now we're going to go into some detail about the nature of this place a little bit later in this video because it is important to understand. But one of the things to keep in mind is that we don't know exactly why Carnage is doing what he's doing. That hasn't necessarily been revealed yet. He's literally on a kind of quest to just attain these little bits of things here and there. And so the ending of this is going to be nuts because I'm curious to see how you guys feel about this. But initially, Hela is told by one of her priestesses that, in effect, Carnage, along with Kenneth Neely, is on his way here. Now, for those of you guys who are catching up with us, you will find a link to the Carnage playlist as a pinned comment here in the video, so make sure you check the comments for that. But the overall gist here is that Kenneth Neely was a guy who was trying to gain the attention of Carnage by basically committing a series of gruesome murders, which he ultimately did. He just didn't quite know what he was getting into when he started making deals with Carnage, as anybody who's familiar with the character will tell you. The other part of this is she says that John Shade, along with Cletus Cassidy, is on his way here as well. Now, Cletus Cassidy is the traditional host of Carnage in the same way that Eddie Brock is the traditional host of Venom. The difference is that Carnage and Cletus Cassidy have been separated, so the Carnage symbiote's just doing its own thing. Cletus is currently occupying the mind of John Shade, meaning he's just a personality that talks to John, right? That's really all it is. But these guys are all headed towards this realm for a particular purpose. Now, the funny thing about Hela is she initially decides not to intervene, not to step in. She will eventually, but she chooses not to right now. And this all goes into the nature of Hela, right? Remember, she's always looking for a way to escape her position in ruling her realm and expand its sphere of influence out into the other realms. It's just kind of her main MO. And so what we end up doing is jumping over to John Shade. Now again, Cletus constantly chimes into him. And one of the things to keep in mind is that when John Shade first encountered Carnage, and when he was imbued with the Cletus Cassidy personality, this came with a small portion of the Carnage symbiote. It's not enough for him to fully utilize the symbiote in its totality, but it's enough to get him out of like some hairy situations. And that's literally what happens here, right? Like they're just kind of coming across the various denizens that exist within the realm of hell, some of which are beings who have just kind of taken up residence there because they were sent there when they died. Others are just beings that have been there the entire time. But whatever the scheme and motivation, the level of power these guys have are pretty capable. And that's what we end up finding out. The reason why John Shade is here is to cut Carnage off at the pass and get to Malachith before Carnage can. Now, this is a really, really cool thing because we haven't seen Malachith since the end of the War of Realms. And for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with that story, we don't need to go into details about it, but the long and short of it is that the War of Realms was a Thor story that basically dealt with Malachith launching an attack against all the 9 realms, including Asgard, in an effort to conquer him. But John Shade realizing Malachith is what Carnage is going after is a huge thing, because if the Carnage symbiote bonds itself to Malachith, it could change everything. And the reason for this is Malachith is every bit as powerful, if not more powerful, depending on the situation, than someone like Thor. Malachith bonded to a Carnage symbiote would unleash chaos across the entirety of the universe. Almost nobody could stop him. He's that capable. And so John showing up here, he's actually talked to by the Cletus Cassidy personality. And the question is, how did he get here? Now, of course, again, John doesn't really know the specifics about what went on with Malachith, the War of Realms, all that kind of stuff. He just knows like some dark elves showed up on Earth in New York and like fought the superheroes and the superheroes won, and that's basically it. And even while Cletus Cassidy doesn't know the details, the important thing here is Cletus knows enough to know that if Carnage gets his hands on Malachith, it's game over. So he literally tells John, there's only one option you have here, which is to kill him. Now, one of the things that I want to specify, do not let Cletus's intentions here trick you into thinking he's a good guy. He's not. Cletus has never been a good guy. He is a tried and true psychopath, right? He's the answer to the question, what would happen if Joker from DC Comics got the Venom symbiote? That's what he was supposed to answer when he was originally created, and he answered it in spectacular fashion. And so this is one of those instances when Cletus just kind of shows that he has no real humanity or remorse of any kind whatsoever. And even John Shade chimes in and says, like, I'm a cop, Cletus, right? I can't just kill killed people arbitrarily. And the response of Cletus is, "You are in hell, John Shade, driven by a symbiote running through your veins, while the voice of a serial killer talks to you in your head. I think we left cops and robbers behind quite some time ago. Don't you?" And so following that, we basically switch back over to Carnage and Kenneth Neely. Now again, Kenneth is just kind of being brought along for the ride. And where initially he was just ecstatic about the idea of joining Carnage, the longer he's been on this quest with the Carnage symbiote, and the more he's learned just how psychotic the Carnage symbiote is, the more he's realized he doesn't want to have anything to do with this. And all this really comes to a head when he's met by Rosevelg. Now, Rosevelg is basically what's referred to as the Sin Eater, quite literally those who arrive within the sphere of hell. And even in this particular instance, when Rosevelg stares into their eyes, they're forced to relive all the pain and anguish that they've instilled in people across the world. Now, it's not the same as the penance stare from the Ghost Rider, right? The Ghost Rider makes you feel the physical pain that you forced everybody else to endure across the entirety of the time you've been doing terrible things. What Rosevelg does is he forces you to look back on the things that you've done, almost as if you're observing them in the third person. And so he literally uses his power on Kenneth, and Kenneth is forced to witness every horrific act that he had committed. Now, what's so interesting about this is you could argue that it's the evolution of Kenneth kind of moving away from being like this psychopathic killer, sociopath type person, and him becoming more human, right? Regaining his humanity. But the reality here is I would argue that what's really taking place is that in those moments when Kenneth was committing those heinous acts, there was a kind of separation. It was one of those things where he didn't really see them as people. They were just a means to an end, which is oftentimes the motivation of a sociopath and a psychopath, a complete and total lack of empathy, whether they're born without it or they simply lose it over the course of their life. It's lack of empathy nonetheless. But by Kenneth having to watch the things that he's done, suddenly he has to come to terms with himself as a person. And that's what's so crazy here, is because in this moment, he kind of breaks on a personal level. And then Roosevelt turns his attention to Carnage. And this is when things get really cool, because Carnage almost taunts it, right? And says, like, if you want to make people relive their sins, or you want people to see what could happen as a result of the things that they do, then look in my eyes and see what I see. And that when Roosevelt looks into the eyes of Carnage, it in turn experiences mass pandemonium and chaos, right? The idea that Carnage wants to take over not just the world, but the universe itself, to instill chaos, fear, death, suffering, all that kind of stuff, right? To be the literal embodiment of Carnage itself across all of space and time. And it's enough to drive Roosevelt insane, right? Even so far that it loses its eyesight, right? Now, of course, one of the things to understand is that because of the fact that Hela kind of rules this place, I wouldn't say with an iron fist, she effectively sees all. And so her priestess, watching what's going on through the eyes of Roosevelt, in turn informs Hela of what this entity has witnessed. And again, Hela chooses not to act. She's really more curious about what's going on here. Now, one of the things that I also want to establish here is that's the level of power Hela has. When it comes to these different beings, also known as Hell Lords, Mephisto, Hela, any one of these guys, they're the most powerful in their own realm. Now, they're not all powerful. Really good example of this is Franklin Richards, the son of Reed Richards, defeated Mephisto in his own realm. And so when you're talking about beings with this level of power, for somebody like Carnage, he's no match for Hela. That's just the way it is. In her own realm, he's no match for her. And it would be a fool's errand to try to kill her in the first place. At least that seems to be the case here in the moment. And so that's why she's not overly freaked out. She's not terrified by some symbiote that's gone awry and shown up on her doorstep, causing pandemonium and chaos out there in the realm somewhere. And so one of the other things that goes on here is there is a bit of a conversation between Carnage and Kenneth in terms of the nature of the place that they're in. And Kenneth even asked the question, like, I've had to witness everything that I've done. Is this where I'm going to end up when I die? And the response of Carnage is, only if you're a Viking. But as Carnage and Kenneth continually make their way towards basically finding Malachith, we end up jumping back to John Shade and finding out that he didn't kill Malachith. Instead, he set Malachith free. And here's the irony of this, where Kenneth Neely has no idea or had no idea what he was getting into when he started making deals with Carnage, John Shade has no idea what he's getting into when he's making deals with Malachith. Because in his mind, the idea of Malachith being freed by John and the two of them escaping would be something Malachith would be thankful for, and to a degree he is. But with thanks also comes a kind of unwritten rule, which is to say, I've set you free, we need to get out of here, and whether Malachith agrees with it or not, he would basically honor that one request, right? It's just how we do things, just the way things are. And so what ends up happening is Malachith and John Shade arrive at a place whose name I can't pronounce, but it's basically called the Cosmic Waterway. Now, one of the funny things about this is that this is one of many instances of people being able to enter in and out of different realms and access other realms. This is like Hel's own version of the Bifrost from Asgard. That's really all it is. The problem with this is that it's guarded by giants who have been stationed there by Hela. Of course, these giants have basically passed somewhere along the line, but this is their charge. And so Malachith, being as capable as he is, basically slaughters them all. And yet again, the priestess of Hela comes to her and says, Malachith and John Shade are at the cosmic waterways, they're killing the giants, they're vying to escape. And again, Hela doesn't really seem to take it seriously. She says, Hell is not a prison, it is a ring of trials, where great questions are asked of those who find their way here. We do not have these answers yet. How am I to make up my mind? This intruder, have his sins been weighed, or has he yet to commit them? If he has been brought to our shores in a noble pursuit, does he deserve to suffer then for all eternity? So again, it's kind of a moral quandary, but do not mistake Hela's intentions here. This is her just kind of musing and even entertaining herself to a degree. Her bigger scheme here is to find out why these guys are here, and that if there's one of them she can use to basically make herself an ally of, and then expand her sphere of influence. It's always her main goal. It's always the thing she's shooting for. And so what ends up happening is that in musing to herself in this way, she presents herself to Carnage. Now again, Carnage would be a fool to attack Hela in her own realm, and in fact, he doesn't. Right? Like she pops up and she says, I am Hela, mistress and queen of this realm, and I know and see all who set their feet upon hell snow. I don't take kindly to the hellbound seeking to escape before they've paid for their sins. I might be able to help you find what you seek. And Carnage does not attack her, he doesn't taunt her, he literally says, and what do I get in return? Because it's a smart move. If you were to attack Hela, she would just annihilate him on the spot, and that would basically be it. And so jumping back to John Shade and Malachith, what John starts to realize is that Malachith's bloodlust, right, his desire for battle, along with his anger towards being punished in this way in hell, has just kind of taken hold. That he just wants to slaughter and kill everything within this realm as fast as he possibly can. And even when John tries to reason with him, the response of Malachith is, I'm not done here yet, right? Like, I'm not done killing every single being that's here. Even if I killed every occupant of this realm 1,000 times over, it wouldn't be enough. And so where Malachith and John are basically arguing and bickering with each other, Carnage appears alongside Hela. Now, this is a really, really interesting showdown, and this is one of the reasons why I love the Carnage story right now, because you get to see these kind of conflicts and matchups that you would normally never see in Marvel Comics. And it's so cool, right? Seeing Carnage allied with Hela going after Malachith, one of the most powerful gods out there in Marvel, is just something that you don't see. And even Malachith himself does not take Carnage seriously. He goes as far as to say, like, I'm aware of what you are, right? You're a symbiote. I've used you, or at least your kind, in the War of Realms. Specifically, he's talking about Venom. But the response of Carnage is, you faced off against versions of me or things similar to me, but you've never actually fought me. And that's what's so cool, is because what it shows is just how powerful Carnage is. This story arc is a massive boost in the power that Carnage has, because under any normal circumstance, Carnage would not be able to go toe-to-toe with Malachith. But whether it's because of the fact that he absorbed the power of some of the Hellhounds, the power that he's basically gained over the course of this story, or the fact that Ram V, the guy who's writing the story, is just moving the power of Carnage up, whatever the motivation is, this guy goes toe-to-toe with Malachith and then overpowers him. And when he does, he just starts like pumping this kind of substance into Malachith. Now, what's actually going on here is it's less Carnage putting something in Malachith and more him siphoning something out. And that's what's cool, is because while John Shade is watching all of this, he sees Kenneth and realizes Kenneth making a deal with Carnage is what set all this in motion in the first place. So he initially tries to kill Kenneth. Now, of course, the forces of Hela stop him, and literally she says, this guy Kenneth is under my protection, which is part of the deal that I struck with Carnage. But you, John Shade, are not supposed to be here. Your time has not come, and you've committed no sins that would bring you here in the first place. So unless you want to end up here, back off, right? So it's kind of Hela doing him a bit of a favor, which is sort of a really interesting moment here. But what ends up happening is that even when the question's asked by John Shade of Hela, do you know what Carnage is trying to do? Do you know where all of this leads? Her response is, I have no idea what he's doing, but I have some idea of where he's going, some idea of what it is that he's about to do. And by the gods, I do love a good apocalypse. And so here's the beauty of all of this. This is this kind of mind-blowing ending, right? What Carnage did, the whole reason he went after Malachith in the first place, is because Malachith was touched by the Venom symbiote in the War of Realms, which means a piece of the codex is left behind. Now remember, a codex is what's left inside of a person whenever they are bonded to a symbiote. It's basically a door. When he had removed this codex from Malachith, he got a piece of the Venom symbiote. Now, why does that matter? Because remember, in the Venom comics, Eddie Brock is out there in the multiverse. Not only that, he's contending with these astronomically powerful versions of themselves. And so what this means is that with Carnage now in possession of the Venom symbiote, he can find the Venom symbiote. He can kill the Venom symbiote and attain the symbiote's power. If that happens, Carnage takes over control of every symbiote across not just the universe, but the multiverse. Because remember, Eddie Brock is currently the King in Black. The original King in Black was Null. Null created every symbiote across the multiverse. With Eddie Brock replacing him, Eddie now does the same. But if Carnage can access the Venom symbiote, kill Eddie, and then take over, Carnage now becomes the new Null, the symbiote god of Marvel Comics. It's nuts. If that happens, everybody dies. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.